Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Mobility Talks, the web series by the EIT Urban Mobility, where all aspects of urban mobility are considered and discussed in depth. I'm John Paul Judson, the moderator of the series, and I'm certainly delighted to be back to welcome you online. It's been a few months since our last episode, but as you no doubt have seen, it's not like nothing has been happening. The urban mobility scene is bustling, and this is well represented by the many activities of the EIT Urban Mobility. But the Mobility Talks is a space for reflection and debate. And today we have the opportunity to take some height and get inspired on a topic that has fascinated humans for centuries. Whether it's flying saucers, flying cars, Aladdin's magic carpet, or the Mary Poppins umbrella, the idea that humans can conquer the skies for everyday mobility has long been seen as a futuristic and largely unachievable scenario. That being said, the skies have become a major space for mobility, whether it's for passenger transport, cargo transport, surveillance systems, satellites, drones. In fact, the skies are already very busy. In many ways, one could argue that it's strange that there should not yet be a fully fledged mobility solution when considering the major evolutions in the aviation sector, for instance, and that flying from, say, Brussels to Bratislava can cost less than a train ticket from Brussels Centre to Brussels Airport. So despite flying having become as accessible as ever, urban air mobility remains somewhat in the shadows of our imagination. So, is the future ready for takeoff? And what may or may not make urban air mobility a reality in our cities in the future? This is why we are here today, to hear from different perspectives, business, academic, cities, and urbanist perspectives on the matter. But before introducing the speakers, I'd like to mention that to the right of the live stream, you will find the Slido box. This is our audience interaction tool, and will allow you to raise questions, vote for questions, and respond to polls. You'll see now that a first poll is appearing. What does urban air mobility inspire for you? And we'll be keen to hear about that. You have about 50 characters to let us know what your initial thoughts are on urban air mobility. And I will be monitoring this tool, and I really encourage you to use it because it's always interesting to hear from speakers, but also from questions and comments raised by the audience. And I will do my best also to take those up. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions to our keynote speaker and then in the course of the panel debate. Please note that if you would like to follow the event full screen, you will no longer be able to see the slider. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Irene Luque Martin, who is Senior Project Leader at MVRDEV, I have to get that right, and she is PhD in Collaborative Urban Planning with Digital Technologies. Irene is joining us from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So welcome, Irene, and thank you so much for joining. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jean. Very happy to be here and really looking forward to bring my perspective. As you well said, I'm representing here MVRDB, and I will explain now who we are. But this project and this presentation I brought in is really about how urban air mobility could really be seen from a different eyes. And I think same as for me was really challenging starting this project as a designer, as an architect, as an urbanist. I think for you all might be also triggering some thoughts about what this means. So let's start. Well, first is like, who are we? Because what is MVRDB? And I don't know if any of you have been in Rotterdam and have been seeing the Mart Hall, but this is the type of architecture we do, but we are also urbanists. We are actually funded and led by Jacob, Natalie, and Winnie, and they are three very visionary architects and urbanists and landscape architects who decided in the 90s to really dare the world and they're the briefs, and they're the conventional ways to do things. And that's why they started their company. And I'm, of course, part of this big company that works all over the world and that works with all type of disciplines. And when we became like a big family where we do very wide range of projects, from a really detailed interior design and trying to research new technologies and new approaches to urbanism and architecture, to practically a vision of a full region or a research about urban air mobility, which is this case today. We work in regional scales, and we visioned, or we try to envision utopias and where it goes, where is the future of our cities. But we also try to go towards building scale, so we really understand what is the detail of our living conditions. We are committed and we are responsible on what we do. That's why we are always understanding what is the climate change impact of the things we do. But we also try to comply that and to really connect that with the voice of people, of what is the situation in the society and where are the challenges there. We actually 14 years ago were dreaming about flying cities, because specifically Winnie Mas is a visionary, and he's the director of the Y Factory. So they were, with all the students, really researching what is the city like if we will fly. And this actually went to an idea of what is a flying city and how we will connect new environments, which was an utopian research. But it actually landed in what in 2017 we started, that is, together with Airbus, we started a journey of 2 years as strategic advisors to understand where is the city integration level of urban air mobility that they were developing. So this is a big challenge for an office that does from really small scale to really large planning, large scale planning. But this was the perfect moment to put in crisis and to really ask questions about what is urban air mobility and what it's going to bring in the city and what it's going to bring to our society and how we are going to connect that with our future. And for that, we call it the city integration. That was our line of research, and that was our scope, and that was our goal, to really bring together with Airbus a reflection about this. And the reason of why is, sorry, I think, yes, I clicked too fast. The reason of why is because there is no technology that has not shaped our future in our cities. When the car in the 60s was widely spread, our cities became in a sprawl. When the energy and infrastructure started to develop, our cities started to develop around the infrastructure. When our computers were in data centers and they were concentrated in IT spaces, and now they are all in our pockets, our whole idea of remote working, or me providing this lecture to all of you in all your countries and all your places that you are right now in, it would be impossible. So this shapes our city, and technology is shaping our city, and we need to be responsible and really to understand what is the impact that this has in the city, but not the impact in only in a negative connotation, but also in a positive one. So what is going to trigger and how we are going to deal with that. So that's why, for instance, in the sample of the car, we know that there was a lot of shadow on how the car is actually composing our city. And there were already in the 60s many people talking on the fear of what the car could provide in our case. It became actually the driver of many city development and many visionary urbanists that they were defining the city as the sectorial city, where you have one part that is for living, another part for working, and another part for having fun. Well, actually, we know that city centers or livable cities is really composed of combining the three things. You work, you enjoy, and then at the same time, you actually go to your home and you can sleep. Reduce mobility and reduce the problems of many of the megalopolis we are having right now. And this is taking a lot of investment and a lot of time on how to balance. And it's not about that the car or the technology was evil. It was about the way it was implemented that it was a problem. And I think here that in this strategy and this research, we really try to take really in account these lessons learned to think we need to understand what is the sustainable approach of urban air mobility, and we need to reinforce that because that will bring us a resilient future about urban air mobility. To do that, we need to understand that this third space becomes a new public space. It's not only about where you land and how you land and how it impacts your surrounding. It's like, where do you position that landing spot? How is going to be the cross situation beyond the technicalities that we play a lot with Airbus and all the technical people, how you can overlap, how you avoid traffic jams in the sky, and how do you connect points. Is really about how do you frame who gets the trigger economy and the push that this is going to get, who in the city is getting that, and where is the neighborhood that is actually getting that possibility and that option. For that, we have actually developed a urban air mobility approach, and that approach is actually mainly based in 3 principles. The first principle is about complementarity. Mobility as a service. UAM cannot be an alternative, it needs to be a complementary system that helps the existing mobility system and fills the gap that they are there. We know that we could facilitate better urban development. So rather than monocentric cities that are really mobility dependent, urban air mobility could fill the gap, the last mile journey that it consumes a lot of time in many of the big metropolis, like we have studied in Shenzhen or in Sao Paulo or in other thousands of cities we have done. And of course, local, sustainable, and affordable cities. So really trying to say that UAM has not only the entrepreneur approach to it on how do you do passenger mobility, but also how do you actually shape it for the good of everyone, and how do you make it affordable, and how that affordability triggers economy in the neighborhood, not only the economy based on the people who take the flight. So there was really complicated situation, and to apply these principles, we actually did a very strong methodology. That was, we first need to select a city, and to select that city, we develop a huge global scan of what cities are suitable for urban air mobility and which cities urban air mobility contributes to a sustainable mobility system. Then we create an UAM city network, which is like in the city, where are the attracting points, where are the points that we need to join through urban air mobility to fill that gap of the last mile. And then how do we integrate the vertiport? And this step is really crucial, because the vertiport is not something that, like right now, a helicopter pad, not that you put on top of the tower and that's it. The vertiport is actually a huge infrastructure that requires a lot of new infrastructure in terms of energy and other conditions. And it demands also potentially in the business case to be integrated to other functions. So an hotel, a city center, a commercial space, because then you trigger much more economy in their surroundings. So then the vertiport is no longer one place to stop and to land, but it's actually an infrastructural element in the city. To do that, we actually experience in many cities, Sao Paulo, Shenzhen, I remember we also did Paris, like we did around 10, 12 cities in the world where we researched this methodology and how it could look like. And of course, one of the key outcomes indeed was that the network became something really extraordinary and a really strong complemented to the system mobility. And then the cities were much more willing to talk about it. They were much more interested to understand what is the goal of urban mobility and how to bring it in. So it's no longer that disruptive technology that comes in and impacts in the decision making and the policy making, but it's just more something that it comes to help in your network. Then also envisions a lot of complementarities, not only at the large scale of the city policy making and investment in infrastructure, but in the day-to-day life of people. And there is when it's a really strong concept to bring it and to bring it along with the people, because the communities are really strong decision makings, whether you implement urban mobility or not in your city. And to do so, you need to define what are the values of your integration. So is an integration with the mobility, is an integration with the nature to providing unique opportunities to develop tourism, or is an opportunity to actually develop a really strong hub of mobility, energy, and then a commercial center and hotel, a co-working, etc., like in Shenzhen in this case. And it is also to actually filling and help that infrastructure investment is using the city to fill in the gaps that we have as a city. So it's one investment with 2 or 3 or 4 actually objectives that help to define the gaps that right now the city is having. In this case was in LA, and trying to fill this residual space between the infrastructure, because it's a space that no one uses and it cannot be used because of the service area, the buffer area of the infrastructure, but for landing would be ideal. So then how do you then allocate functions under the landing there to promote or to provoke new visions of the city? And of course, all this, the difficulty of all this was to communicate, because, and that's what we work a lot with Airbus, is like how city integration, which is essential to think on urban air mobility from being a dream of flying cars and movies of science fiction, how do you transform it in a fact, in a something that it can be implemented and it can be accepted, and not only accepted, but also appropriated. So then we're working a lot of biennales and conferences on what are the values of urban mobility and how to bring it together. And I invite you all to go to our website and check the research, because you will enjoy a lot seeing that. But in definitive, in the end, what we really try to do is to really think what is the design-driven approach. What we see right now happening in urban mobility and in other many mobilities is that right now a design-driven approach helps to build a narrative that helps to understand what are the consequences on the long term. And the consequences are not technical or exclusively governance, but they are also spatially intrinsically related to our society. So what type of cities we want in the future is defined by what type of mobility we define today. So I invite you to see this research and to contact me, and I'm really looking forward for this discussion, because I'm bringing a very, I think, broad perspective.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Irene, for that, for opening up this this broad topic indeed. I mean, you talk about basically how urban air mobility can effectively integrate into cities. So what would you say is the big challenge? I mean, why aren't there more cities that are leading on this from your experience, from your research so far?
Well, I think, to be honest, right now, there are no cities that want it because they just want it. Urban air mobility, there are many cities, and I'm not at all cities like I'm personally, but there are many politics that they have really difficult understanding of how UAM could contribute to their mobility system, because, for instance, to make it a business case right now is really not affordable for everyone. So politically, it's not really strong for them to be able to bring it in. But if you add the level of what it brings beyond the pure trouble, so what if this urban air mobility brings infrastructure in your city? So it means you have to invest in vertiports, which help in neighborhoods, which help to mobilize and to redistribute that investment in the city that is usually based in the CBDs, that is usually based in the core business centers. That politically it becomes much more attractive. On the other hand, we have the business in the cities and the entrepreneurial approach, where this system is really attractive for them. So for instance, in places like Shenzhen, you see it way higher than in Sao Paulo, the attractiveness of bringing it in, because they are really ready to fill in the gap of the last mile, while in Sao Paulo, they are worried with other more socially driven concerns, so it's much more difficult to bring it in, although the mobility problem is the same or very similar. So I think it depends a lot in the political context, and it depends a lot in the status on the socioeconomy of the society, but also depends in the approach that you do for it. Like Shenzhen and Sao Paulo, etc., they were really open to listen this approach, where you go beyond only investing in landing pads and then in networks, but you really build a system that plugs in the mobility, in the system mobility system. And then is when you start getting much more support from communities. And that's the main thing.
And you mentioned there's a political risk there, possibly in terms of costs and in terms of a certain uncertainty about what all this could look like. At the same time, I see in what the audience is raising as to, you know, what urban air mobility inspires for them. One of the comments is, well, actually, it's the only solution to address the UN's SDGs by 2030. So could it not also represent a political opportunity? And is that not understood at city level?
Yes, it could definitely offer the opportunity. I think the challenges between what it could be, UAM right now, in a system, it could actually fill the SDG and it could help to create a complementary mobility system with many disconnected areas and in many urgency situations. But, and there is always a but, the business case and the situation of the how you make business implementing urban mobility is such a new technology that right now is not widely open. It's the same at the car in the 60s or the phone. Whoever had a phone in their house, it was really privileged person. So right now there was no access for everyone. So if we are talking about urban mobility in 50 years, yes, sure, potentially it will help a lot in SDGs and in other concerns. But right now, urban mobility needs to be an investment that is not for everyone. And it needs to be normalized and go through the process of every new technology coming in the world. And if we trust the process, the difference is, like I'm saying, in the car, we didn't plan it. In UAM, we could plan it. And then that could speed up the process when it becomes more affordable.
Okay, so it's still a sort of an embryo of a solution at this stage, and thank you very much, Irene, for opening that. I think you already opened quite a few doors, so thank you very much for having been with us. And I will now turn to our panelists, because we now have the opportunity to discuss with four bright minds of the urban air mobility sector who will help us apprehend some of the issues that Irene has raised and many others. So I would like to introduce our four panelists. We have Christelle Al-Haddad. She is Research Associate and PhD candidate at the Chair of Transportation Systems Engineering at the Technical University of Munich, joining us from Munich. We have Corwin Huber, who is Chief Executive Officer at D3 Technologies, also joining us from Munich. We have Rohit Kumar, who is Head of Urban Air Mobility at Toulouse Métropole, joining us from, yes, you guessed it, Toulouse. And we have Gonzalo Velasco, who is Business Plan and Innovation Director at Ferrovial Airports, and he is joining us from Madrid. So a warm welcome to the four of you. To kick off this discussion, I asked each panelist to send me in advance an image that for them represents the concept of urban air mobility. And so I would like to fire away with some of these images and ask each panelist then to comment, preferably on his own image. So let's launch image number one and see what this is. Okay, so okay, Rohit, you want to speak?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me for this discussion. Okay. This image is like what exactly we think about the urban air mobility. You know, like you have a limited space available in your city. Okay. And if you talk about the urban air mobility, we are at very nascent stage. We have not identified the complete ecosystem and complete block of the value chain. So it's very important to define or develop this in a very sustainable way. Because like Arina said, like if we won't plan now, we can't develop it in a proper sustainable way for the future generation. That's the first thing. Second thing, this image also let you know that this technology indeed has some potential. Okay. But before jumping into on urban air mobility, we need to question about the why. So if we think about the why and then we think about the how, then only we can plan it properly. Otherwise, we will end up filling up the space like we did with the car technology. And then we will think what to do next. So as a city from Toulouse side, we have taken this approach that how we can develop urban air mobility in a more inclusive way, putting the citizen in the center of this development. That's the first part. And secondly, to think about what social, economic, and environmental benefit it will going to bring. It may take some time. We are fine with that. So two things I would like to put here. You have a limited place, and city need to take the lead and bring this in their mobility strategy to develop in a sustainable way. If we want to get the benefit of this green technology, or want to solve our current problem of pollution or congestion, basically. So just remember that you have a pen and this is limited place, as simple as that.
Okay, so the sky is not infinite above our heads. That actually reassures me that you actually had something to say, because when I first saw this image, I thought, oh no, it's the writer's block. He doesn't know what to say. It's the blank page. But luckily there was more to that. Okay, thank you, Rohit. That already sets quite the scene from your side. So let's go over to the second image and see whose that is.
So, hi, this is mine. Thank you, Jean-Paul, for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here. So I'd like to give you 5 seconds to have a look at this cartoon. So I chose this cartoon essentially because I find it a quite funny way to represent something that I believe is very important in technology in general and UAM in particular. I think it's a bit ironic here because it's like wheels and it's like, oh, okay, of course, that's so irrelevant now. But it's a bit like also what Irene said at the beginning, it was the same with the cars, no cars. And that could be the same with UAM. So that could be it's a very important aspect to consider, essentially the acceptance, the perception of the people. And that's where I would like to take the opportunity to talk about our work, my work in particular, and our work in the chair. We are interested to not only look, we don't really look at the technological side of UAM, but we see it as a mobility solution that is for people. And then we have to understand what is the perception of people to that. And among these the perception issues is acceptance. And so I think that's very important to consider, both the users and the non-users perspective. And I mean that's where I'm coming from. So I hope I gave an idea of the work I'm interested in.
Okay, so yeah, you're looking at the why, because I suppose if you answer the why question, you will, in theory, raise a little bit more the acceptance. But at the same time, one shouldn't be naturally fearful of everything. I mean, there are also good things that can happen out of innovation. So, okay, that's great to hear from you. So let's have a look then at the third image. I guess it might be between Corvin and Gonzalo. So the third image.
Thank you very much. Is my microphone on? Very good.
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
So this actually is a cartoon by Ingram Pin that illustrated an article in the Financial Times by John Gapper in June 2019. That is already 22 months ago, a long time in the accelerated pace of today. And this, quite frankly, is only a friendly version of what some skeptics and detractors warn about. Another variant is a dystopic vision of thousands of air vehicles crowding the skies, obscuring the sun, emitting noise and chemical pollution for the benefit of a privileged few. Let me tell you in no uncertain terms, this humorous interpretation does not represent what the advanced air mobility or AAM industry is about today. The good news is that cartoons such as this did actually inform the discussion that led to where we are today and will keep evolving our position and societal responsibility. The discussion has actually led to the firm understanding that public benefit is the key ingredient to making urban air mobility work. Human inventiveness has led to a confluence of technologies that will allow flexible transportation at a fraction of infrastructure cost and surface ceiling, by the way, associated with today's terrestrial transport. No, AAM will never replace a well-run subway system, but it will relieve pain points in today's gridlocked ground systems. And to Irene's point, it can offer completely new options of connecting previously disjointed city elements, etc. It offers an entirely new dimension in city planning if properly executed. It will also relieve pain points in today's gridlocked ground systems, and it can be very effective on so-called thin routes. And yes, there is evidence that air mobility can be achieved at a price point that makes it an everyday proposition, not just a life sweetener for the wealthy. Let us forget the much abused image of the flying car for a moment. We are not talking about scattering the neighbor's leaf pile by taking off from our porch. We are talking purpose-designed and mission-specific people movers operating from certified vertiports. While this technology is advancing rapidly, my company, D3 Technologies, is working at high speed to make sure that any kind of urban air traffic will be managed in a certifiably safe, transparent, and accessible way. We at D3 are building the Internet of Mobility, rule-based, automated air traffic control, and we're building it in a way that allows communities, and this is important, to maintain control of their skies and empowers them to define the rules of engagement. Very much to Irene's point of enabling the cities to actually use this new technology for their purposes. We see this as a vital component to ensure that advanced air mobility in urban skies will provide tangible public benefit. There will be no urban air mobility without the management tool of automated air traffic control. And we will be there when the market needs it.
Okay, thank you, Corbin. I'm glad you depict that that is not your vision, because I was thinking, well, that looks quite congested, that sky. And if this is meant to be a solution for congestion, that surely isn't the way. Just maybe for the next hour or so, Corbin, maybe try and see if you're not touching maybe your microphone. I mean, there's a little bit of background noise when you're speaking. Okay, so we now move to our fourth image. I reckon Gonzalo must be ready because it's very likely his, unless something very strange is going on. So please, Gonzalo.
It is. Thank you, and thanks for letting us participate in this forum. Yeah, so I choose this image because this is our contribution. What we want to be our contribution to urban air mobility, basically to build infrastructure to have something tangible as part of the value chain. But let's take a step back. We started analyzing urban air mobility more than 2 years ago, and we started analyzing it in terms of what would be the potential impact of eVTOLs at our airports, at the airports that we operate, for example, at Heathrow. And we should realize that eVTOLs were not only going to be a new mode of transport for our infrastructure, but they could have an infrastructure that could be independent to an airport infrastructure, and also it could be independent from the typical helipad that we see at our rooftop of an office building. So at Ferrovial, we want to develop this type of innovative infrastructure in order to make urban air mobility for people a reality. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gonzalo. So that shows already different perspectives, different ideas on this complex issue. But I think I would like to start with Corbin's view there of the skies and the possible congestion, the possible multiplicity of options and solutions up there in the sky, and how do you actually get all of that organized? Because if I look at myself walking in a street in a city, I can see, there are signs, there are roads, there are pavements. I know where to go. I know where I can turn right, where I can turn left. I mean, it's sort of naturally organized with the physical infrastructure around me. And if I look up, it's actually pretty open. I don't see much limit there and much organization. So how can that come about above a city landscape? Corbin? How can we get this organized?
That, to me, that is quite a key question. There is a number of answers that surround this question. The background, again, is the question, what do we want to achieve at the end of the day? I believe that most of the population right now feels that the ground, the earth, our two-dimensional environment is complicated enough, and many of us don't want the third dimension to be cluttered in addition to what they see already today, which again leads to the very simple fact that the communities that basically organize the structure in which people can pursue their happiness need to have a say in what happens. So when you ask how do we organize the skies, number one, we need to be very cognizant of what the city people want in their skies. If we force this upon them, it will never work. So we are looking at two separate elements that need to go into the equation here. The one is what is acceptable to the population in general, and how can we organize what is acceptable to be commercially viable and efficient for those who have to live by operating it. So if you organize the skies, you have to create rules of the skies. And the hard, cold fact is that there is no precedent for organizing urban airspace. A point that I like to make is that there is urban mobility already today. There are cities in this world where you can fly helicopters in towns, but the regulatory background upon which this happens is a very traditional 100-year background of standard flight rules and helicopters operating off tall buildings and flying to dedicated destinations. So number one, there already is something happening in cities in the air, and there is great concern among the regulators that whatever happens now next has to in some way fit to what is already going on. So that already informs part of the regulation. But what we're seeing in general in the future is that we will not be seeing the same type of public involvement we have seen in the past. The nation states are going to step back from making legislative rulings and will look for industry proposals for rulings, and they will retain the capacity of a watchdog so that the rulings that are devised by industry actually do conform to safety issues and to public benefit considerations. So we are seeing a change in paradigm of how rules are made in parallel to everything else right now. This is an important point. Aviation rules are starting to change, and that in itself is neither good nor bad, but it creates additional possibilities. For instance, for cities to become involved, to talk to those who are proposing rules. So again, I think that the regulators as such, the large national and multinational authorities such as EASA, FAA in China, the CAA, they are looking towards suggestions from industry that they then can assess and work upon. I think it is not reasonable to expect that the nation states will provide the final ruling on how the sky will be managed.
So you would say the organization should be industry driven, but consciously driven, let's say, to put it that way. If I go then to Gonzalo, because you were talking about the infrastructure, independent infrastructure for this specific type of urban air mobility, that it would be different from other air mobility infrastructure. How do you see then the organization of the skies? I mean, do you see a dedicated system specifically for that per city, or can there be some more harmonization?
Yeah, let me start with the infrastructure very briefly. So in terms of vertiports, we're starting from the heliport regulation. And what we foresee is that in the coming years, there will be a specific infrastructure regulation, but it will be less restrictive than the heliport regulation, just because the performance of the eVTOLs that are being developed have less limiting conditions, just to speak. Going back to Earth navigation. So on Earth navigation, I would like to clarify one thing, because the current regulation for airspace allows already to carry passengers on an aircraft with a pilot. If the area underneath the flight path is densely populated, then there has to be corridors agreed with air navigation suppliers in order to have frequent operations. But that regulation already exists in the EU. So it's just that specific procedure that you need to agree with the air navigation providers, okay? So regulation is not an issue in this scenario in which we have pilots, but and here's the important distinction. If we want to fly an aircraft without a pilot on board, then is when we need to have new rules. And I think most of the conversations around airspace, air navigation are around this area, and I think it's important to present that. So the aircraft could be carrying passengers or cargo, but in both cases is not permitted as of today, except for exceptional cases, and we've seen trials, pilots, etc. So EASA is working at pace on this new regulation, and it will take some years to bring it to life.
Okay, so you're making the distinction between manned and unmanned, and there are basically no options really today for any unmanned aircraft. Is what you're saying. I would like also to go to Christelle on in terms of this, industry-driven, but let's say consciously industry-driven, and then the role of citizens, of cities in effectively hosting these systems and using these systems. So can you comment a little bit on how these players can get involved in also structuring the organization of traffic in the skies above their heads?
Yes, so I think I would like to talk about two things. So there is, on the first hand, what is like that people would accept and that would lead as an input to, well, defining where these flights are, the vertiports, the demand, all of this. And on the other hand, there is the point where we are looking at UAM as a mode of transport, and how effective will it be? Like, how does it make sense or not? For the first part, to understand, well, the people, like, as I said before, there's users, non-users. So if we're looking at the users and we are assuming that this UAM is a mode of transport, for those people, it has to be attractive enough that they choose it compared to the other modes. So then what we do, or our roles in academia, let's say, is we do these stated preference surveys, we do these questionnaires, let's say, we put UAM as a mode with specific realistic times and costs, and we change these, we try to do a sensitivity analysis, we put it together with other modes, let's say a flight, a train, etc., and under different alternatives, we try to understand what is that willingness for the person to pay that, given these attributes. So that will let us understand the value of the time for the users in a specific location to give it as an input, because then we can know if that makes sense or not. That's from the user perspective. From a community perspective, that is at an even larger scale, is that do we even plan to ever use it? When would we use it? Like kind of a timeline of adoption. So that's more in the, let's say, the input that we can provide to the other stakeholders. That's the one hand. The other hand is that based on the rules that were previously discussed by Corvin or Gonzalo, like, I don't know, where the regulations that allow vertiports to be in a certain location, we do not really, we will take that input, and then based on where, let's say, based on the number of flights that are allowed per day, based on this frequency, then we will calculate this this demand. We will then be able to confirm again whether that makes sense or not. So then to see if we are adding UAM on top of the existing modes, and we want to assess it. So we want to see if it's improving the status quo or not. So again, that's from the academics point of view, that's exactly what we are trying to investigate and what we can provide these inputs and to give them to the aviation experts, the policymakers, that they can see what is the how that demand can shift from one mode to another, whether they're willing or not. So that's kind of the input we can provide, let's say.
Okay, I mean, it's important to have that organized somehow, because I'm not sure it's so easy to understand exactly how to go about creating acceptance. I mean, ideally it goes the other way around. I suppose there's a very, very strong demand. But if I go then to Rohit, I mean, you were already talking about this new public space, right, at the beginning. So could you give us then also some thoughts on how you would organize that? Because again, I mean, if I were to enter Toulouse on the road, I would see the sign, you know, Toulouse. I would know I enter the Toulouse space. How does that work up in the air?
First of all, let me re-highlight the definition of urban air mobility here, like or advanced air mobility. Okay, so for a city, even you are using a drone or you are using a flying taxi to transport a pizza, to transport a passenger, or to transport a medical equipment, everything is urban air mobility and advanced air mobility for us. Okay. So we have to just stick to the definition. It's not just about the big vehicle or big vertiport only. That is one misconception that is in the market. Okay. Second, if we talk about how we want to do it, so there are 2-3 things that we need to consider while working on this basically. And the first important thing is the capacity of your airspace. What is the sustainable capacity of your airspace which could tackle the demand? So before doing any deployment, we have to understand that if you want to go in a sustainable way. Then the next question is how we can do it in different city. Will it be same or it will be a different? So it will be different in each city, considering about the factors like public acceptance, that particular city's building size, their population density, and all other parameters. Okay, so in nutshell, we have to think about citizen, we have to think about the capacity, we have to think about the political willpower or analysis that this particular thing going to bring something positive to your sky, and then bringing all the stakeholder around the table basically. So this trigger another good question out of it. Who is the one stakeholder who has the capacity or capability to bring everybody around the table? And the answer is only city or local authority, because all the industry partner or academia partner or 2 competitor can trust a local authority. But if a particular project or in a particular city, a company is driving a particular project, city other competitor won't collaborate. And if different partner or different industry partner won't collaborate, this sector cannot grow. And I keep repeating this all the time. This is right now the blue ocean. It's not the red ocean for the time being. So it's important that local authority come, citizens should be involved, need to be identified, and then development should happen.
So we're facing a complex problem, and clearly there are no real examples of governance models having been developed. And you're saying that the facilitator of these initiatives should be the city, that they have a legitimate role to bring all the different stakeholders together and to lead this process forward. Could I then get a reaction from maybe especially Corvin and Gonzalo on that? How do you view the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders in this environment, and who, according to you, should take the lead to facilitate and get to an outcome? Maybe Corvin first.
Thank you. Yes, well, very much to Rohit's point. I totally agree. And as a matter of fact, history is already bearing out Rohit's approach. What we're seeing is that in parallel to quasi-competition between vehicle developers, and to be honest, there is no competition between vehicle developers because there is no operating market. But let's say kind of in the public perception, there are vehicle designers out there that are talking more loudly or more visibly than others are. So there may be some form of competition there, but I see a fascinating other quote unquote competition happening right now. And that is, and pardon my formula, but it is a competition between so-called model regions. What is actually happening is that individual communities or entities are actually saying, here is a target for a deliverable service, and that actually incites specific development. So I would add to Rohit's statement that a city is at the core of the development. I would say yes, it is. And it actually has a chance of influencing development if it is not only an organizer, but also proposes an operations mode or a mission for the development that needs to be done. So basically, the MVRDVs of this world would have to help a city kind of come up with a coordinated vision for what needs to be developed, and then technology partners can actually implement or adapt their technology to a given target. And I think Rohit makes a very valid point here. We will be seeing global regions or municipalities coming up as actually being the spearheads for this development. And just a last point to what the regulatory setup will be, and very much to the point that Velasco made earlier, the fundamentals of urban transport will remain the same. A vehicle supplier needs to supply an airworthy vehicle. The operator of the vehicle will have to guarantee that there is continued airworthiness for that vehicle. The pilot or the automated system that flies the vehicle will have to take over responsibility for that vehicle. So the fundamental structures of how you organize air safety will remain the same. There is not the slightest chance that will change. So again, the fundamental rule book will remain very similar to what we know today, but it will be adapted at varying speeds. And there again, to Rohit's point, individual cities and regions will be the drivers.
Okay, Gonzalo, would you like to comment also?
Sure, and I totally agree with my colleagues. It's surprising for me that in all this new sector, I find a lot of collaboration in Europe and in the US, which are the regions that we are focusing. I see collaboration in the eVTOL developers area, and also on the infrastructure regulation or navigation space also. And I guess it's not just because of the fact that we all have a lot to learn and a lot still needs to be developed, but also because even though we talk about urban air mobility, there are a lot of types of services, a lot of type of technology, a lot of types of products that are within that spectrum. So some developers are focusing on large aircraft, other in small ones, other to carry passengers or to carry cargo. Others want to develop large infrastructure, others want to develop little infrastructure, etc. So I guess that there is a space for everyone, and also that contributes for that collaboration. And going back to the point on who needs to be kind of the facilitator, I think the cities, for sure. The cities are the ones that need to facilitate, to articulate how this come to life. Not just bringing regulation and stakeholders together, but also trying to make this from the beginning a viable business model, which it was one of Irene's point at the beginning. It has to be profitable. So there are many business models that we can take from existing sectors and apply to this, and there could be P3, so public partnership, public-private partnership agreements. It could be concession type, etc. So it's the city.
But I mean, to some extent, the city has to be the facilitator, but also the regulator, right, of this airspace. I mean, they're the ones who should also be placing certain limits, and possibly then limits on the profitability of certain activities. And you mentioned that there are so many possible services that could happen up there via the skies. And one of the questions also from the audience, what is then crucial to secure acceptance for these multiple flying objects above our heads that are all carrying multiple solutions, right, to certain people in cities? How does one go around creating this this level of social acceptance for something that is possibly exponential. Christelle and Rohit, maybe a reaction on that.
Yeah, sure. The answer is very simple. Like from the audience, whosoever asked this question, if somebody tell you that with the drone, the COVID vaccine reach you in 2 minutes, and with the car, it will reach you in 10 minutes, will you allow drone?
I'm afraid the audience can't answer live.
So the answer is yes. It's important. Like we have, that's why I said you have to engage the citizen from the day one. And that's what in the Toulouse, before we started this VM project in 2018 in January 2018, we organized this day workshop with the different group of citizens to understand what they want. And two things come into the majority. The first one is, yes, we are scared of drone, but we are okay to use it for the medical purposes, basically, which is really essential. And we have to use it because today we are using even helicopter in our city center. And second thing, we trust the local authority or the cities because they won't think about making money out of it. They will try to do something to solve a problem in our life, basically. So it's not us who should be, pushing what we want to do it. As a city, there are what changes we made in this, because if you see take the global projects, start seeing the different global project, and especially in the Europe, what you will feel that through the initiative of European Commission, cities are making the projects on which we sit as a city, we all are working that are really progressive, and that's a long term basically. So we are working on the sustainable urban mobility policy. We are working on financing market study. We are working on a operation project. We are working on the investment, the long-term 10-year program, like in Toulouse, we have a $165 million project of urban mobility, and is also part of that. So city need to be a facilitator, and citizen need to be the one who should let you know what exactly they want. And then when you involve them, and after that you are doing something, there won't be any, resistance. But yes, if you say tomorrow I want to do a pizza delivery because that will going to make a business case out of it, so that won't go really well.
So you're saying that the benefits outweigh the risks or the perceived fears that this could represent for citizens. Christelle, would you agree with that?
I wanted actually to add on to what Rohit said. I mean, I do definitely agree that we should involve citizens and let them know. I think, in the broader term of acceptance, the usefulness is very important, like perceived usefulness. That's in every basic technology acceptance model. And that means exactly that the people have to know, what am I gaining out of that? But to add to that, like to the example that, okay, would you go by 2 minutes with this or 30 minutes with the car? Of course, that was like a quick example. I think the more we give awareness and the real bigger picture, the better it is, because we also want to earn the trust of the people if we want to go forward with UAM. And then we have to, as much as possible, try to make them engage in the process. So, okay, there is this vertiport. Probably many people don't know what is that process. How do you go there? Am I going to wait half an hour to board on the flight, or is it going to be 2 minutes? So I think the whole kind of process is something that should be shared with the users, and then only then can we know really if the people will think, okay, this is worth it, I want to use it. This is in the sense of an economical point of view. In the sense of the acceptance in general, I think it's a bit a more aggressive term because it's like acceptance, rejection, but it's in that direction. And then again, the more they are involved, the more they are, there is a benefit. But I think it's a very strong statement to say, oh, the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. It really depends on the case. It depends, it really depends. It's like that's what we should investigate actually. For which use case it makes sense, for where it makes sense, for how much capacity it makes sense. So that's the kind of questions we should, let's say, answer.
And is there maybe then a perception that it's actually not for everyone, and it will be for a limited number of interests or issues? I have a question here in the audience that is saying that urban air mobility is advertised as a luxury service for business executives, which is only profitable under ride-sharing models. You know, isn't this a wrong path to begin with? And I just wonder if this is not maybe, you know, hiding another question, which is, you know, is it really going to be for citizens? All these developments. I mean, you know, is it going to be public transport? You know, is it going to be mass public transport? So maybe also a reaction on that. I guess Gonzalo first.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to your specific question, or the audience question, is it going to be a mass mode of transport? I don't think so, to be honest. I don't believe that we are going to see thousands of flying cars over our heads. I don't believe that. According to our analysis, we think that, and also it really depends on the specific route that we're analyzing and if it's an intercity or intercity service. But we don't see penetration rates or cannibalization rates, because at the end of the day, you are replacing an existing mode of transport. We don't see figures higher than 5%. So that is kind of a rough order of magnitude. And I would like to get other views on this, but for us, a 5% penetration rate or cannibalization rate of existing modes of transport is not material enough in order to change the paradigm of transportation. But it really tackles on those specific pinch points that were referred to in the past, in which you have times of the day in which you have a lot of congestion, you have certain routes that have a lot of congestion, and the existing mode of transport cannot cope with certain restrictions. So there are specific use cases for passengers and for cargo in which these services will be valuable. But I think that we cannot forget that a flying object, an aircraft in general, it's always, by definition, going to be more expensive than a ground vehicle. So as a principle, we'll need to assume that it's going to be more expensive than ground transportation.
Okay, Corvin, I'll go for Christelle as well, because I'd like to get a view on of yours on this luxury versus mass transport. Christelle.
I was actually going to comment more on the figure, on the 5% of Gonzalo. I wanted to say that we, like about 2 years ago, we worked as part of a Bavarian project on exactly trying to assess the impact on the existing transport of UAM, and we looked at the upper Bavarian region. I would, in the order of magnitude, I would agree with Gonzalo. We have actually, our results are published, we have found that in that specific case, it was something about 1%, what we thought in the best case scenario, and that was, again, for the upper region of Munich, and that's like a taxi share, roughly, let's say. But again, that's for the specific example, for that best case scenario. If the trips are large enough, that could go maybe more into the Gonzalo direction. If their trips are longer, for shorter trips, it makes less sense. But I just wanted to agree on that. And then regarding the question about whether it's luxury or mass transport, I can answer again from my personal perspective that from the evidence that we have so far, it is not a mass transport. A luxury, whether it's a luxury, I think it can be more than that. And that's where we have to actually work on, because I don't think any of us is interested into just a luxury mode of transport. So that's not what we're discussing when we say urban mobility. So yeah.
Okay. Corvin, a reaction then on the figure as well, maybe on the scope of this market.
Well, I think that in discussing this, and that's one of the challenges that we have in general in discussing this topic, is that we are looking at intersecting targets. So on the one hand, we are looking at what can happen within the known paradigm of transportation today. So we look at what is happening in transportation the way it happens now. At what point does it make sense to replace existing or to enhance existing transportation with a new mode? And there you certainly arrive at the numbers that Christelle and Velasco are quoting. I would entirely agree. And then you come from the perspective that Irene presented earlier, where humanity, if you want to use that great word, recognizes that you are accessing another dimension of development, of a new form of city development that becomes possible. And then you might be talking totally different numbers. So I think it is fairly moot at this point to discuss numbers. It is basically a question of whether humanity wants to kind of tackle a new frontier of development. And I totally understand that for the time being, we have to use cannibalization numbers, or at least enhancement numbers. But I'm seeing those as two fairly distinct spheres that we need to be talking about. How do you start into technology by replacing or enhancing traffic? And how do you use that very same or adapted technology in order to open up completely new dimensions? And I find it a little, I would warn against only seeing the replacement scenario. Space travel is predicated on the fact that if you travel to space, you find something that you didn't know about earlier, and it makes it worthwhile. And I think we're looking in part at a similar scenario here, where we're opening up dimensions. Now, it is fully understood that the initial motivation has to come from the status quo. So I'm not pushing one or the other solution. I think they need to be observed in parallel.
And because we get to some sort of attention here, right? Because indeed, I mean, it seems like a lot of investment and uncertainty for a small share of something to be replaced by urban air mobility. And at the same time, it takes a leap of faith to some extent to imagine that there is much more to be reaped in the future. And in the meantime, that means that there will be a lot of non-users if there are actually few current mobility solutions being replaced by urban air mobility, and with all the risks that it carries in terms of, for instance, noise. And I have one of the questions here in the audience that raises this. So how can one combine the two? How can one create acceptance with non-users when they will only probably be perceiving the negative effects without actually getting the benefits, possibly? Rohit, a comment on that?
Yeah, so everything, every time it boils down to like how you want to develop it, basically. What are your steps, So what practice we are trying to promote, or what we are trying to do here, basically, okay? I don't know whether it is widely acceptable or it is, widely approved or not, but what we think that there are multiple problem statement about the urban air mobility, basically, okay? And you have to solve the different type of problem related to the insurance, problem related to policy, problem related to the regulation, type of vehicle, certification, infrastructure, data, privacy, and all those things, basically. Okay. So if we want to deploy this system in Toulouse, we don't talk about the demonstration. Demonstration is okay. In presence, we can do it. Everybody can do it. Like if you have drone and you monitor and you want to do a VV loss or VLOS operation, you can do that. But if you are seriously talking about the deployment, so deployment is only possible when you have all this kind of block need to be identified, okay, and it need to be deployed together, basically, this whole ecosystem. Now the next question comes to it, okay, how we can do it? We cannot do it inside a city, that we all understand, because it is crowded, it is not safe. We can't do testing and trial in the operational city. So in Toulouse, we are trying to develop a multimodality test center near Frankegel Airport, which will going to give you a picture of future mobility system, basically, how the ground, air, energy, data, and mobility as a service, the together whole system will work, basically. So when the system will be ready and operational, so citizen will come there. So this is one thing that regulation is saying, that noise level need to be X or Y, But when a citizen visit your living lab, they realize even that particular noise level defined by the regulator is not acceptable to them. So you have to engage them in the feedback and then we have to develop it accordingly, basically, before deploying. So it's very important to do it in a very sensible way, and I keep repeating and keep promoting and being a flag bearer that city need to be on the center table. City need to be on the center table, not just because that I represent a city. No, it's because city is only having the patience, who doesn't have to investor pressure or sales pressure or marketing pressure to do something rash. They have to do something in a proper way which could be sustainable and long term, basically. So even there is a problem of noise, and citizens are having the problem with the noise and the negativity. So we cannot deploy till the time it reaches that stage. Now the next question which is linked to this, then how economy will survive, how startups will survive. So always in all the technology development, there are few companies which survive, there are few companies which goes down, and there are few investors who believe in the vision and pump in more money for the long term, basically.
Okay, so you say it's still possible, and there are experiments, living labs where citizens can express these concerns, and that the situation can be improved accordingly. We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to start getting to some slightly shorter answers, more focused, and maybe get a little bit more operational. So what are the next steps in all of this? We understand it's complex. We understand there are multiple solutions that are possible. But what are the most realistic applications, according to you, that will be happening quicker than others? We mentioned passenger transport, cargo transport, targeted applications like delivery of medicines and that type of very specific thing. How do you see this rolling out? And please try and keep it, very short and precise, core idea. Let me start maybe with Gonzalo first.
Sorry, I think Irini was raising her hand for a while, if you don't mind.
Irene? Who, sorry?
Irene.
Will I respond to that question? I would love to respond to that question.
Okay, as our special guest, I allow you 1 minute.
Thank you, John. Just making a plan. That's what there is not there in UAM right now. Planning how to operate this. And that's not yet there.
Okay. So the plan. So what could this plan look like, Gonzalo?
Yeah, and to be very specific and linking it to what I mentioned before in terms of the cost compared to other modes of transport, I think that the obvious use cases for us will be for specific routes in which people will save a lot of time, but obviously that time has a value, and therefore we will target, could be business related, it could be leisure related, but in any case, people that are willing to pay a premium in order to save 50% of their time in terms of travel, for example. And for cargo, it has to be valuable cargo. I mean, we cannot think that we are going to carry some cheap thing using aircraft. It has to be valuable, as it happens today with commercial aircraft.
But you imagine that passenger and cargo could be rolled out more or less in sync. It's just a question of the premium aspect of being delivered quickly.
It could be in sync because each specific use case potentially it has each specific location and service. So yeah, it could be in parallel.
Okay, Corvin.
Oh, frankly, I think the master plan is already out there, but people don't want to realize it. Urban air mobility is step 2 in advanced air mobility. We're already seeing applications where medical flights are being performed, where where new aircraft types, VTOL, eVTOLs, EVSTOLs are being operated, and we will be seeing this kind of use case evolving. A lot of the vehicle designers out there are actively looking for applications. There are ship-to-shore applications. There are dedicated applications in coastal areas, and there will be a phase in which we will be seeing increasing uses outside of cities that will then inform the way these vehicles are used in cities, because we will know the metrics, we will know the commercial parameters, we will know the operation modes, we will know the safety levels, and that will all inform the city usage. And to Rohit's point, I would not like to see where we narrow this down to either the cities drive the process or the corporation or the companies drive the process, because the final result will be somewhere in the middle. If we will wait for the cities to have the final plan, nothing will happen. I mean, basically, we'd have to wait another 15 years until the final concept is out before we start developing something. That's not the way it's going to happen. The vehicle and system developers will make suggestions. They will try to find initial use cases. They will be operated, and the data gathered from these initial operations will inform the end game that the cities need to get involved in.
Okay, thank you. Christelle, maybe do you see that there's space for all possible applications, or will it happen rather gradually? And in which case, which applications do you think will go first?
Yeah, I want to start by saying I totally agree with both. I don't know if it's Velasco or Gonzalo, but I'll take my chance.
Gonzalo.
I heard both. Gonzalo and Corvin, in the sense, on the one hand, yes, about the advanced air mobility, because yes, okay, urban air mobility connotates that it's in the city. We have to move a bit forward, expand our horizons, and then also maybe to answer the audience question, what is the benefit? It's exactly where in these routes where there is a clear benefit, where it's serving some areas that would be very poorly served otherwise, could be for different purposes. Then the other point was that exactly it's not, it has to be economically feasible. So it will maybe start by being for specific routes, specific purposes, but to be able to answer that, we really need to define the goal. And if that's travel time reduction, or like this, let's say from a city perspective, that's travel time reduction while being environmentally friendly, while we have to put all of these factors together and see which one has the best outcome overall. That's if we are looking at the overall benefit of the citizens. So I would say these are the use cases that I see happening first. Also the emergency medical services, but yeah, that's what I have to say in general.
It's interesting, this travel time reduction and that urban air mobility could be an answer to congestion, when there are also many ground applications trying to solve that same problem. So it will be interesting to see how that all pans out with bicycles and scooters and all sorts of weird objects on the ground as well, that sometimes you're not sure what name they have.
I just wanted to add one last thing. Also, if we are foreseeing that urban air mobility is growing, then we also, like at least as transportation engineers, we care about this induced demand, that extra demand that might be created exactly because of the introduction of UAM. So that's also something we have to keep in mind, that induced demand. But yes, thank you, Jean-Paul, for the wrap up.
No, we're not quite there yet. So
okay.
I have more up my sleeve. Rohit, also a comment then on this rollout, and what do you see as being the next applications happening first?
Before that, I would like to comment to Covin's comment. So what I said, that cities should be doing it. If city is not doing it, then industry has to do it basically. Mm-hmm. But if city will do it, then it is a win-win for all the parties basically involved in this system. If you ask us basically to summarize it in terms like what is the next application or what is the next thing we need to do, so I'll comment on two things. First is about the long term. Make a strategy or development for the long term. Not for the short term that I want to fly in 2 years and I want to deploy in 3 years, not like that. What I want to do from today and how I want to see it in down the line 10 year, 15 year, 20 year. So we can seriously focus money, energy and the time in a proper way. And second thing, whosoever is leading in whatsoever group, whether city, whether industry or somebody else, depending on the activity, try to bring everybody across a table, including the regulators, including the investors, city planner, city, a citizen, and then start the dialogue. it's okay to start from the scratch sometime, basically. And it's never late to start, basically. So if we follow these two things, it may take 3 year, 5 year or 7 year. But when the product will come out of it, a solution will come out of it, it will going to be sustainable, green, and the long term.
Okay. Okay. So I think that's an optimistic message. So what I will do now is ask you, each of you, and I'm asking the same question to the audience, but I will only give you 30 seconds each to really wrap up your final thought. So by when do you think urban air mobility will become a regular urban mobility solution? Regular, you can take that as you want. I would say somehow well accepted, operational, relatively mainstream urban mobility solution. So who wants to go first? I will give the first 30 seconds to Gonzalo.
Okay, I'll start. And I won't get into the definition of regular, but I think it's feasible to have regular operations in 2024 if the EV tolls are certified by then, obviously. But it will be, I think, around 2030 when we will get to maturity.
Okay, thank you very much, Gonzalo. You've been a great panelist, and in fact, from the word cloud that the first poll that I did, regulations in fact was the main word that came out. That's what inspired. That's what urban air mobility inspired most in people. So clearly, there's a link there. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. The next person up for 30 seconds is Christelle. Over to you. By when?
Yeah, I cannot answer that question. It really depends on what is the definition of urban, where are we talking about? But I mean, if I had to really say something, I would say something in the 2030, because that's the time frame we looked at in our previous investigation. But it would depend on the use case, the place, what we mean by regular. That's my wrap up.
Yeah, the definition of regular. I know it's not such an easy one, but thank you very much, Christelle. You've been a great panelist, bringing the user perspective into all of this, and it's not so easy. I imagine. I will then go over to Corvin next for a 30-second wrap up. By when will this be happening?
If I include manned transport, human transport, air taxis as the as part of the definition, I would say we'll be seeing regular early operations in Middle East and Asia as of 28 and in Europe as of 32.
Okay, that's a Nostradamus style prediction, Corvin. Very precise. Thank you so much. You were a great panelist. It was great to get that perspective on the possible connectedness of the skies. So thanks for having been with us, which leads me then to Rohit for the last 30 seconds.
Instead of when, I will talk about what we need. We need to have the safe system. We need to have the policy in the place. We need to have the governance, and we need to have the acceptance. The day we will get at par level for these 4 things, you will see it flying.
And when do you think these 4 things will magically come together?
I don't know, but we are working on a project for 2030 kind of thing, basically, that we try target, but we don't target it with the time. We can't compromise safety to do it in 2030.
No, that's clear. Thank you very much, Rohit, for your time. You were a great panelist as well, bringing the city perspective into all of this, and maybe the facilitators of the future urban air mobility space. So thank you very much. The audience mostly is split actually between 2030 and 2050. Okay, they had the option of it's already there by 2025, 2030, 2050, or never. But no one answered never. So you can rest assured that at least in our audience, people are hopeful that it will indeed happen. So thank you very much for having taken the time to be part of this event. I hope you found the discussion interesting. I will now be handing over to Daniel Serra, who is the Director of Innovation Hub South at the EIT Urban Mobility, and he has the difficult task of giving us some conclusions. So, Daniel, what did this conversation inspire?
Hi, Jean-Paul. How are you? Nice to see you again. I think we start with these mobility talks. It was in the first waves of the pandemic, I think more or less 1 year ago. And I think we are getting more interesting topics today, and especially with this exciting topic of urban air mobility. I want to say that there are different programs and calls and city pilots today in urban air mobility, and this will try to implement the urban air mobility in the European Union with the goal to create an environment where solutions can be tested and where experience and continuous exchange. I think some of our experts highlight the important that will be the cooperation with the different stakeholders to make it reality and to find solutions for challenges that are really complex, like regulation, technology, the new public space that we need to design, the user acceptance, the demand, and also feasible and sustainable business model. I think the potential role of EIT Urban Mobility is to support all the actors in this complex process of mobility transition. We are facing to create an ecosystem to facilitate this development, and this is one example today Mobility Talk. But 1 week ago, we launched our working group of urban air mobility with some of the front runners of our community, and we will create a specific task force with specific goals in order to support the implementation and the user acceptance of the urban air mobility. As it was said, the Commission will publish soon a roadmap of urban air mobility. I hope that we have something that we can already try to implement, and the EIT Urban Mobility is a new piece of the game that it will support on this game. Obviously, I think the city roles will be very important, as City of Toulouse already mentioned. And just to finalize, I want to thank to all the speakers. I think to Irene, Gonzalo, Corbin, Christel, and Rohit. It was a very interesting discussion. And I think the only thing that we need to do right now is to announce our next mobility talks that will tackle a very, very interesting and sensible topic today for our cities, especially on coming times, is how is public realm moving, and how the public realm will transform our streets and our spaces. This mobility talk will take place on the 27th of May, and I think please follow us in our social networks and try to join our next mobility talks, because we will bring some of the more interesting speakers, thought leaders on these topics, and I'm happy to support on all this process. And from the perspective of urban mobility, thanks to the audience. It was I hope you enjoy, and so you learn a lot today on what is coming on this very interesting topic of urban air mobility.